I watched my son-in-law throw my grandson's baby blanket into the trash. I didn't hesitate. I pulled my car around, walked back to that curb, and took it home with my hands shaking. When I laid it on my bed and felt something hard buried inside the lining, I grabbed scissors and cut it open. What I discovered wasn't just hidden inside that blanket. It was going to expose lies, betrayal, and secrets my family had been keeping for years. But before I tell you what happened next, also download your ebook titled Suspense and Thriller Stories by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Now let me tell you exactly how one handmade blanket tore my entire world apart. My name is Evelyn. I'm 62 years old, a retired school teacher, and for most of my life, I believed family was everything. My late husband used to say that love was the only currency that truly mattered. He meant it with every fiber of his being. He lived it, and I believed him completely. My daughter Patrice was my greatest source of pride. When she was born, I held her in the hospital and promised myself I would protect her from every hurt this world could offer. She grew up strong-willed and brilliant. She was the first in our entire family to earn a master's degree. She accomplished that while working full-time as a nurse, putting herself through school at night. I was at every graduation, every celebration. I knew her dreams before she spoke them aloud. When Patrice met Daryl at a charity event downtown, I thought I was happy for her. He was handsome, polished, and he had this practiced charm that made people feel special when he focused his attention on them. He wore expensive suits, he drove a nice car, he said all the right things at the right moments. But my husband noticed something I didn't want to see. That man's smile doesn't reach his eyes, James told me one evening after we'd had dinner with the couple. We were sitting in our living room, and he said it so quietly, like he was sharing a secret. I dismissed him. I told myself I was being overprotective, that I needed to let my daughter make her own choices. I said I was reading too much into things. But his words stayed with me. They planted themselves in some quiet corner of my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't completely ignore them. Patrice married Daryl when she was 29. The wedding was beautiful, held at our church with white flowers and soft music. I walked her down the aisle, and my heart was so full I could barely breathe. But even on that perfect day, I cut Daryl watching her with an expression I couldn't quite define. It wasn't tenderness. It wasn't excitement. It was something colder, something that looked like assessment. The first few years passed quietly. Patrice worked her nursing shifts. Daryl worked as a financial advisor. They lived in a house in the suburbs that looked like it came from a magazine. Everything appeared perfect from the outside, but phone calls from Patrice became less frequent. When she did call, she sounded different, more guarded, like she was choosing each word carefully before she spoke it. Then Jeremiah was born. My grandson came into the world on a gray March morning, and in that single moment, everything shifted. When I held him for the first time in the hospital, I felt my husband's presence so strongly it nearly knocked me over. Jeremiah had his eyes, that same warmth, that same gentle wisdom that my James carried. He was only hours old, but I could feel it in the weight of him against my chest. Patrice transformed after Jeremiah arrived. She called me regularly again. She asked me to move closer to help out while she returned to work. For the first time in years, we fell back into our old rhythm, Long conversations, shared dinners, the kind of closeness that only comes from truly needing each other. Then Daryl lost his job. He told us it was corporate restructuring. The company was downsizing, cutting positions. I could see the shame written all over his face when he delivered the news. There's something about how a man handles failure that shows you who he really is. Some men swallow their pride and move forward. They adapt. They find new direction. Other men let failure poison them from the inside out. Daryl wasn't the swallowing type. He started spending all his time at home while Patrice picked up extra shifts at the hospital. She was exhausted all the time. I could see it in the way she moved, slow and heavy. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes. I offered repeatedly to babysit so she could rest, but Daryl refused every single time. "I can handle my own son," he'd say, and there was always something sharp in that statement, something territorial and cold. I didn't like it, but I also didn't want to create more tension in a marriage that already felt fragile, like it could break if anyone pressed too hard. Looking back now, I realized I was making excuses for behavior I should have questioned immediately. I was protecting someone's feelings instead of protecting my grandson. That's a regret I'll carry for the rest of my life. That's when Thursday morning happened. I decided to drive by their house around 9 o'clock to drop off some groceries. Patrice had texted me the night before saying she hadn't had time to shop between her shifts. I figured I'd leave the bags at the front door and keep driving. A quick visit, nothing more. But when I pulled up to their house, I saw Daryl dragging a large trash bag to the curb. And sticking out from the top of that bag, visible for anyone walking by to see, was Jeremiah's baby blanket. The blanket my late husband made? My hands went completely cold on the steering wheel. I sat there in my car, trying to process what my eyes were telling me. That blanket wasn't just cloth. It wasn't just another item to discard. It was the last project my husband completed before his lung cancer took him away from us forever. For 6 months, while James was fighting for his life, he sat in his favorite leather chair in our living room and crocheted that blanket, loop after loop, knot after knot. His hands growing thinner and more fragile by the week, still working with determination to create something beautiful for his grandson he would never hold. Jeremiah was born 3 months after my husband passed away. That blanket was the only physical connection my grandson would ever have to a grandfather he knew only through stories and photographs. Jeremiah slept with it every single night, without fail. He rubbed his face against it when he was fussy or scared. He reached for it the moment we walked through the door at his parents' house. And Daryl was throwing it away. I got out of my car without thinking through what I was doing. I wasn't angry yet. I was confused and heartbroken. "Daryl," I called out as I walked up the driveway, "why is Jeremiah's blanket in the trash?" He froze completely. For just 1 second, something flashed across his face. Surprise, maybe even fear. But then he covered it with a laugh, a fake laugh. The kind people use when they've been caught doing something they know is wrong. "Oh, that old thing," he said, turning to face me fully. "It's dirty. The boy's too old for a baby blanket anyway." I looked down at the blanket lying in the bag. It was pristine. There wasn't a single stain on it. There wasn't a tear or any damage. The cream-colored yarn was still soft to the touch. My husband's careful stitches were still perfect, still beautiful. I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, "Did Patrice ask you to throw it away?" He shrugged, and the casual dismissal of my question infuriated me. "We're clearing out old stuff, no big deal." But it was a big deal. And the way he said it, so final, so absolute, told me he didn't want to continue this conversation. So I didn't push back. I just nodded and smiled and turned to walk back to my car. But I didn't leave. I circled the block and parked around the corner. Then I walked back to that trash can and retrieved the blanket with my own hands. I held it against my chest like I was shielding a vulnerable child, and I drove home with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I got home, I laid that blanket carefully across my bed. My hands were still trembling. I smoothed it out gently, running my palms across every inch, checking for any damage. There was none. The blanket was in perfect condition, exactly as it had been the day my husband finished the final stitch. That's when my fingers caught on something. Inside one corner of the blanket, near the edge where the yarn was sewn to the inner lining, I felt something hard, something that didn't belong, something deliberately placed there and hidden away. My breath caught in my throat. I ran my fingers along that spot over and over again, confirming what I was feeling. There was definitely something solid inside, definitely something intentional. My husband had hidden something inside this blanket before he gave it to Jeremiah. Why? What could be so important that he'd hidden it inside a baby blanket? With hands that were shaking, I went to my kitchen and got my scissors. I returned to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I very carefully cut the stitching along that corner, working as slowly as I could to avoid damaging whatever might be inside. My heart was racing with every snip of the blade. When the opening was large enough, I slipped my fingers inside the lining. I felt plastic first, something thin and protective. Then something smooth, cold, heavy for something so small. I pulled out a small velvet pouch, the kind expensive jewelry comes in. My breath stopped in my chest. Tucked into the folds of the lining was an envelope with my husband's handwriting on it. His handwriting. After all of these years without him, seeing his familiar script on paper made me feel like he was there with me in that room. I sat on my bed for a long moment before I opened that envelope. Something inside me knew with absolute certainty that whatever was in there was going to change things. That's how life works sometimes. You get these moments, warnings almost, where you sense that the next few seconds are going to be important, that whatever you learn in the next minute is going to shift your entire understanding of everything. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter in my husband's handwriting. The paper was slightly yellowed, like it had been sitting for years. The ink was fading, but every word was still perfectly clear. If you're reading this, it means you found what I hid. This isn't money or gold, but it's everything I want our grandson to know when he grows into a man. Inside this pouch is my late mother's engagement ring. It's over 70 years old now. She wore it the day she married my father. It survived everything our family went through, every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt. I want Jeremiah to have it when he becomes a man. I want him to understand that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. Love built this family. Commitment built this family. Showing up for each other every single day, even when it's hard, that's what built us. Evelyn, keep this safe. You'll know when the time is right to give it to him. I love you. Always have. Always will. James. I read that letter 3 times. Each time my eyes blurred with tears so heavy I could barely see the words. My husband had written this 5 years ago, right before his illness took a turn he couldn't recover from. He must have realized he wasn't going to make it. He must have known I would need to find this. He must have known that someday our grandson would need to know that his grandfather loved him enough to leave something behind. With shaking hands, I opened the velvet pouch. Inside was the most beautiful ring I had ever seen, a vintage diamond set in white gold with intricate filigree work on either side of the stone. It caught the light from my bedroom lamp and threw rainbows across my trembling hands. I seen my mother-in-law wear this ring when I first married my husband. She was such a graceful woman, elegant and kind. She wore that ring with such pride, like it was a symbol of everything she believed in. And my husband wanted our grandson to have it. But Daryl had tried to throw it away. The realization crashed over me like a wave.
He'd felt that hard spot in my blanket. He knew something was hidden inside. And instead of asking questions or bringing this discovery to Patrice, he decided to dispose of it, to throw away 70 years of family history, to trash a tangible piece of love and legacy. Why would he do that? That question sat heavy in my chest, like a stone. I carefully wrapped the ring back in his velvet pouch and placed it in my nightstand drawer. I tucked the letter in there too, treating it like the precious document it was. Then I folded the blanket and held it against my chest. My mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe Daryl had thought there was money hidden inside. Maybe he thought he could pawn a family heirloom without anyone noticing. Maybe the financial stress from losing his job had pushed him to do something desperate, something he normally wouldn't consider. Or maybe this was who he always had been, and I'd just never seen it clearly enough to acknowledge it. I called Patrice that evening and asked her if she could come over after work. I didn't tell her why. I just said I needed to talk to her about something important, something that couldn't wait.
When Patrice arrived around 7 o'clock that evening, she looked absolutely exhausted. She'd worked a double shift. Her scrubs were wrinkled and her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. But she still smiled when she saw me, and she hugged me tight. That embrace broke my heart a little, because I knew I was about to tell her something that would hurt deeply. I showed her the blanket first, without saying anything. Then I showed her the letter. When she saw her father's handwriting on the envelope, she started crying immediately. Silent tears rolled down her face as she read every word. She read it slowly, carefully, like she was trying to absorb the weight of what her father had left behind. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with red, confused eyes filled with emotion. "Mama, I didn't know Daddy did this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know he'd hidden anything." "I know, baby," I said softly, taking her hand. "But I think Daryl did." She shook her head immediately, like she was rejecting the idea before I could even fully explain it. "No, Mama, he wouldn't." "Then why did he throw it away?" I asked gently, keeping my voice as calm as I could. I watched him put it in the trash myself this morning, and when I asked him why, he lied to my face. He said it was dirty. "Patrice, look at it. Look at this blanket. It's perfectly clean. There's not a mark on it." She picked up the blanket with both hands and examined it the way I had. She ran her fingers across every inch, checking for stains, for damage, for anything that might justify throwing it away. She felt the corner where I'd carefully cut it open. Her face went pale as the realization hit her. "Oh my God," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You think he knew about it? You think he knew something was inside?" "I don't know what else to think," I said, my voice barely audible. She looked at the ring, still sitting on my nightstand, glowing softly under the lamplight. I could see something shift in her expression. A realization, a fear, a recognition of something she'd been trying not to acknowledge. "Mama, please," she said, and her voice was breaking. "Please don't start anything with Daryl about this, not right now." "Patrice?" I began, wanting to understand her hesitation. "He's been stressed," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "He's been different lately. Something's going on with him that I don't fully understand, but he's not himself. He's not the man I married. Please, Mama, just let me handle this. Let me figure things out." I wanted to push. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know what she was hiding, what she knew that she wasn't telling me. But I could see the fear in my daughter's eyes, the way her hands were shaking, and it made me pause. She knew something. Maybe not everything, but something significant. "Okay," I said finally, though it took every ounce of strength I had to agree. "But we're keeping the ring safe, and we're keeping this letter. Those are non-negotiable, Patrice. Those are not up for discussion." She nodded slowly, relief washing over her face like she had been holding her breath. "Okay, thank you, Mama. Thank you for understanding."
We sat together in silence for a while after that, holding each other's hands. I could feel her trembling, could feel the weight of whatever she was carrying. I wanted to help her carry it, but I could tell she wasn't ready to let me. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Miss Jean, my neighbor who lives 3 houses down from Patrice and Daryl. Miss Jean is 81 years old, and she doesn't miss much of anything. She's the kind of neighbor who knows everyone's business without being malicious about it. She's just observant. She notices patterns, she sees things. Evelyn, honey, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've been seeing something at your daughter's house, and I thought you should know what's happening. My stomach tightened immediately. What do you mean, Miss Jean? Well, I've noticed your son-in-law having visitors, she said carefully. Men in suits mostly, professional-looking men. They come by during the day, sometimes in the evening. They go inside for an hour or so, then leave. It's happened 3 times this week alone. Last time was yesterday afternoon. And Evelyn, the way they carry themselves, the way they move, I don't know. Something about it doesn't feel right. Something about those visits feels wrong. Men in suits, coming to the house during the day while Daryl was home alone with my grandson? Did Patrice mention anything to you about these visitors? I asked, my mind already spinning with possibilities. No, honey. I only mentioned it because I know how close you are with your daughter. I thought maybe you'd want to know what's happening at her house. I thought you should have all the information. I thanked Miss Jean profusely and hung up the phone, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer.
The next morning, I drove to Patrice's house unannounced. I told myself I was just stopping by to see Jeremiah, to spend time with my grandson before his mother got home from her night shift. But the truth was more complicated. I needed to see what was happening inside that house. I needed to understand what Daryl was involved in. He answered the door, and I could see the irritation flash across his face the moment he realized it was me. "Good morning," I said brightly, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I came to see my grandson." "He's napping," he said, and he positioned himself in the doorway to block my entry slightly. "Make it quick." But I didn't make it quick. I stepped inside gently and started puttering around the living room, picking up toys, straightening cushions, doing all the things a grandmother naturally does when she's in her grandchild's home. But I was looking. I was searching for something, though I couldn't have articulated exactly what I was looking for. That's when I saw it. On the dining table, partially hidden under a stack of unopened mail, was a leather briefcase. It was open just enough that I could see inside. Papers, envelopes, and a notepad with blue ink that clearly read appraisal notes. Jewelry appraisal. My blood ran cold, ice cold. I felt it drain from my face and settle in the pit of my stomach like a stone. "What are you doing?" Daryl's voice was sharp behind me, suddenly present. I turned around slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Just tidying up. You know how it is." He walked over quickly and snapped the briefcase shut with more force than was necessary. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. His eyes had that flat quality my husband had noticed years ago. No warmth, no humanity, no emotional recognition. "You think you're clever, huh?" he said, and there was no friendliness in his tone anymore, no pretense, no politeness. "That ring could have changed everything. You're sitting on a fortune, and you didn't even know it." My knees went weak. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep myself steady. "It wasn't yours to take, Daryl." He stepped closer to me, and I had to force myself not to back away from him. I could smell alcohol on his breath even though it was morning. "Maybe not, but Patrice doesn't know the truth about our finances. She doesn't know we're drowning. She doesn't know I ruined our credit trying to keep up with her parents' lifestyle. She doesn't know what a failure I am. You think she'd still love me if she knew?" His voice cracked on that last word, and I realized something complicated in that moment. Daryl wasn't just greedy. He wasn't just a thief. He was terrified.
He was a man whose pride had been shattered into pieces, and he was grasping at anything within reach to restore it, to make himself feel powerful again. But understanding why he was doing this didn't change what he was doing. "You were going to sell it," I said, not phrasing it as a question because we both knew it was true. He laughed bitterly, and the sound echoed through the kitchen. "Why not? It's just a ring. It's just metal and stone. What does it matter?" "It's family," I whispered, and my voice carried every ounce of heartbreak I was feeling. He glared at me like I'd slapped him across the face. For a moment, I thought he might say something else, something worse. But then Jeremiah cried out from upstairs, his little voice calling down to us, and something shifted in his expression. He walked away from me without another word, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I locked myself in the downstairs bathroom and called Patrice with shaking hands. She didn't answer immediately. I left a message on her voicemail, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me as soon as you get this. It's urgent. Please, baby, call me." When she called back 20 minutes later, I could hear the hospital sounds in the background. She was still at work, still in the middle of her shift. "Mama, is everything okay? Is it Jeremiah?" "Jeremiah's fine," I said quietly, choosing my words carefully. "He's safe, but we need to talk about Gerald. There's something you need to know, something important. Can you come over after your shift?" There was a long pause. "Mama, what's going on?" "Please, baby, just come over. We need to talk face to face."
Patrice came home early that day. She'd arranged for someone to cover the rest of her shift, and she was visibly shaken when she walked through my front door. I was waiting for her in my living room, having spent the last few hours replaying every moment in my mind, trying to figure out the best way to tell her what I'd discovered. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting down on the couch beside me. Her hands were in her lap and they were trembling. I told her about the briefcase, about the appraisal notes written in blue ink, about Daryl's mask dropping completely, about his admission that he'd already pawned some of her jewelry before, that they were drowning in debt, that he'd been lying to her repeatedly about their financial situation. "He was planning to sell the ring," I said quietly. "He knew about it. He felt it in the blanket and he threw it away so you'd never find out it existed." Patrice listened without interrupting, but with every word I spoke, her face grew paler, her eyes grew wider, and her hands shook harder. "There's more," I said gently. "Miss Jean called me. She's been seeing men in suits coming to your house multiple times this week. She said they looked like debt collectors or brokers." Patrice put her face in her hands. Her shoulders started shaking. I moved closer and put an arm around her, but she didn't cry. She just sat there trembling, like she was trying to hold herself together by sheer force of will. "I didn't know," she whispered through her hands. "Mama, I didn't know any of this. He told me it was handled. He said he was taking care of everything." "Of course he did, because you trusted him, because that's what you do in a marriage. You trust your partner." She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a pain so deep, it broke my heart all over again. "What do I do, Mama? What do I do?" I thought carefully about my answer because I knew this moment was going to matter. I knew that what I said next could influence how my daughter moved forward. "First," I said, "we protect Jeremiah. That's the priority. Then we figure out the rest." She nodded slowly. "I need to confront him. I need to ask him directly." "I know, but be smart about it. Get documentation. Get proof. Talk to a lawyer if you need to. Don't let emotion drive your decisions." Over the next few days, Patrice started investigating her own finances. She discovered credit card statements Daryl had hidden.
she found evidence of multiple items pawned: her grandmother's bracelet, her mother's pearls, other pieces of jewelry she'd inherited over the years. She discovered that their credit score had plummeted because of debts Daryl had taken out in both their names without her knowledge. The scope of his deception was staggering. He hadn't just made one mistake. He hadn't just taken one impulsive action. He'd spent years systematically lying to her, stealing from her, and selling off pieces of her family's legacy. When Patrice finally confronted him, he tried to gaslight her. He tried to convince her that she was overreacting. He tried to make her feel guilty for not being supportive enough while he was struggling with his job loss. But Patrice had the documentation now. She had the proof. And she had me. She called me one evening and said, "Mama, I'm filing for separation. I can't do this anymore. I can't be married to someone who lies to me this completely." I held my breath, wanting to make sure she knew I supported her, that this was her decision, that I would stand beside her no matter what she chose. "I think that's the right decision, and I'm here for whatever you need."
But before Patrice could file for separation, something happened that changed everything. Daryl came home one evening acting like nothing was wrong. He wanted to have a family dinner. He wanted us all together, me, Patrice, him, and Jeremiah. It struck me as strange, but Patrice texted me and asked me to come. She said she had a plan. She said she wanted me there as a witness. I agreed. That Saturday evening, I arrived at their house at 6 o'clock. The table was set nicely. There were candles burning. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misunderstood everything, if there was some explanation I was missing. But then I saw Patrice's face. She looked resolved, determined, afraid, but ready. We sat down to dinner. Daryl made small talk about the weather, about something he'd seen on the news. He was performing normalcy, but it was unconvincing. The tension around that table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Partway through the meal, as we were eating, I decided to trigger what needed to happen. "Daryl," I said calmly, setting down my fork, "I need to ask you something. I need to know exactly what you were planning to do with that ring." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His jaw tightened. "What ring?" he asked, but his voice was hollow. "The ring my husband hid in Jeremiah's baby blanket. The ring you tried to throw away. I'm asking you directly, what were you planning to do with it?" He looked at Patrice. Something passed between them in that look. A moment of recognition. Maybe a moment where he realized he'd been caught. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had lost all conviction. I pulled out my phone. I had recorded our entire conversation from that morning, every word he'd said admitting his knowledge of the ring, every confession about the debt, every lie he'd told. I pressed play. His own voice filled the room. "That ring could have changed everything. You're sitting on a fortune and you didn't even know it." Then his voice again. "She doesn't know the truth about our finances. She doesn't know we're drowning." And, "Why not? It's just a ring." Patrice gasped. Jeremiah, sensing the tension, started to cry. Daryl's face went completely white. "Daryl," Patrice's voice was sharp and filled with pain. You told me you were handling everything. You said the financial stuff was under control." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Patrice, baby, it's not what it sounds like." "It sounds like you tried to sell my father's ring," she said, cold and clear. "It sounds like you've been lying to me for years. It sounds like you pawned my family's jewelry without my permission. It sounds like you're a thief." The word hung in the air between them. Thief. It was the most brutal word she could have chosen because it was the most accurate. "Get out," she said quietly. "Get out of this house. Get out of my life. Before I call the police and press charges, you need to get out." Daryl looked at me, then at Patrice, then at Jeremiah crying in his high chair. Something flickered in his expression. Maybe remorse, maybe just regret at being caught.
but it was too late for redemption. "You're making a mistake," he said to Patrice. "No, I'm finally correcting one." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I heard his car start in the driveway. I heard him tear out into the night. And then there was silence. Patrice picked up Jeremiah and held him close. She closed her eyes and tears rolled down her face. I moved over and wrapped my arms around both of them.
The weeks after that unfolded slowly, like pages turning in a story that had already been written, but was only now being read. Patrice filed for separation the following Monday. Her lawyer was efficient and professional. Daryl fought some of the terms, but ultimately he didn't have much leverage. The documentation of his financial crimes was overwhelming. The community around them found out what had happened. News travels in neighborhoods. People talk. Some neighbors approached Patrice with their own stories. They'd suspected something was off. They'd noticed his mood swings. They'd seen signs of financial desperation. But knowing what people suspected and having to live through the reality of betrayal are two very different things. Patrice moved back in with me temporarily. She brought Jeremiah, and my house filled with the sound of a child's laughter again. It also filled with the sound of her crying at night when she thought I was asleep. I'd hear her from the guest room, letting out the grief she held back during the day for Jeremiah's sake. One evening, about a month after Daryl left, I sat in the rocking chair in my bedroom and rocked Jeremiah to sleep. He was almost 3 years old now, old enough to sense that something had changed in his world, but too young to understand what. Patrice sat on the edge of my bed watching us. "Mama," she whispered so as not to wake Jeremiah, "I feel like Daddy was watching over us through that blanket." I smiled, kissing Jeremiah's forehead gently. "He sure was, baby. He sure was. I almost lost everything because I trusted the wrong person," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. I reached over and took her hand with my free hand, the other still rocking gently. "You didn't lose everything, Patrice. You found the truth, and sometimes that's worth more than what you lost. The truth is a gift, even when it hurts." She squeezed my hand. We sat together like that for a long time, just the three of us, in the quiet of my bedroom. Over the following months, Patrice began to heal. Not quickly, not without setbacks, but genuinely. She returned to work with renewed purpose. She spent her days off with Jeremiah, rebuilding their routine, creating new memories that weren't tainted by Daryl's presence. I kept the ring and the letter safe in my nightstand drawer. We didn't talk about them much, but I knew they were there. They were a reminder that love had protected us, that my husband's foresight had saved not just a material object, but had revealed the truth about Daryl's character before he could cause even more damage. 3 months after the separation was finalized, Patrice called me one afternoon while I was gardening. She said, "Mama?" And her voice sounded lighter than it had in months. "I got a job offer. It's a promotion at the hospital. Better hours, better pay. It means Jeremiah will be in daycare more, but I can afford it now without depending on anyone else." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "That's wonderful, baby. I'm so proud of you," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you. You stood by me when everything was falling apart. You protected us." That's what family does. We protect each other. We love each other, even when love reveals painful truths. Patrice accepted the job, and she and Jeremiah moved into their own small house. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs.
She decorated Jeremiah's room with bright colors and put his favorite toys on the shelves. And she hung a picture of my late husband on the wall, so Jeremiah would grow up seeing his grandfather's face, knowing where he came from, understanding the legacy of love that had protected him. One evening, about 6 months after Daryl left, I visited them for dinner. Patrice had cooked, and we sat at her little table as a family of 3. Jeremiah told me about preschool in his adorable 3-year-old way, his words tumbling over each other in his excitement. After dinner, after Jeremiah was in bed, Patrice and I sat on her small porch with cups of tea. "Mama," she said, "I need to ask you something about the ring, about what Daddy wrote." "Okay," I said gently. "Do you think he knew? Do you think Daddy somehow knew that Daryl would try to take it, that he was protecting me even after death?" I thought about that question carefully. I thought about my husband's wisdom, his ability to see people clearly, his protective nature. I thought about how he'd chosen to hide something precious, not in a safe or a bank, but in a blanket, where it would be held close by the people he loved most. "I think," I said slowly, "your father understood that the most valuable things in life aren't safe in banks. They're safe in love. He hid that ring not to protect it from theft, but to make sure it would only reach someone pure of heart, someone worthy of understanding what it represents." Patrice nodded, accepting this answer. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm going to be okay, Mama," she said. "We're going to be okay." And looking at her, my strong, beautiful daughter who had survived betrayal and come out the other side still believing in love, I knew she was right.
Exactly 1 year after the night I'd cut open that blanket, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Is this Mrs. Evelyn Johnson?" a man's voice asked. He sounded professional, kind. "Yes, this is she," I replied cautiously. "My name is Dr. Richard Chen. I'm the owner of Chen and Associates Fine Jewelry here in the city. I'm calling because I believe you own a family heirloom, a vintage engagement ring from the 1950s. Is that correct?" My heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I do. How did you get my number?" "Well, that's where the story gets interesting," he said. "About 3 weeks ago, a man came into my shop trying to pawn that ring. He claimed it was his to sell, but something about his story didn't add up. The engraving inside the ring caught my attention. It read, 'For my love, forever true.' I'd seen that exact engraving before. Years ago, I'd appraised that very ring for a man named James Johnson. He came in to have me verify its authenticity and value before he gave it to his wife. He told me it had been passed down through his family." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. Dr. Chen continued. "I refused to accept the ring from the man trying to pawn it. I told him I needed verification of ownership. He left angry, and I never saw him again. But the interaction bothered me, so I did some research. I found obituaries, I found family records, and I found you." "Thank you," I managed to say. "Thank you for not selling it." "There's more," Dr. Chen said. "When that man left, he was so angry he knocked over a display case. The ring fell out of the case and wedged itself into a crack in the floor. We didn't find it until we were doing renovations last week. I was holding it, examining it, when I noticed something I'd never seen before." My pulse quickened. "What?" "There's a hidden compartment in the setting, inside the filigree work on the side. It's so small, so expertly crafted that you'd never notice it unless you knew to look for it. Mrs. Johnson, I've opened jewelry for 40 years, and I've never seen work this intricate."
Inside the compartment, there's a folded note. I want to return this ring to you personally, along with the note. Can you come to my shop? I made an appointment to meet Dr. Chen 2 days later. When I walked into his shop, I felt like I was walking into a dream. The store was elegant and warm, filled with sparkling displays and soft lighting. Dr. Chen was an older man, perhaps in his 70s, with kind eyes and gentle hands. He brought out the ring, and I gasped. It was even more beautiful than I remembered. "Look here," he said, using a jeweler's loupe to show me the hidden compartment in the filigree work. It was so small, so perfectly hidden that I would never have found it on my own. "Mrs. Johnson, your husband was a remarkable craftsman. He must have commissioned this piece specially." He carefully extracted a tiny, folded piece of paper from inside the compartment. The paper was so delicate, it looked like it might disintegrate if handled roughly. He placed it in my trembling hands. "I'll give you privacy to read it," Dr. Chen said, stepping away to the back of the shop. With the utmost care, I unfolded that paper. It was written in my husband's handwriting, but the ink had faded to almost nothing. I had to hold it up to the light to read it. "My dearest Evelyn, if this note has found its way to you, it means I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've hidden. I wrote this letter the day I commissioned this ring to be redesigned. I had a jeweler add this secret compartment, and I wrote these words knowing you might never read them, but needing to write them anyway. I've always known that life is uncertain. We never know when our time will end, and I've always worried about the people I love being lost if I'm not here to guide them. So I built this into the ring, not as a treasure, but as a message. To our grandson, if you're reading this, you're a man now. You're old enough to understand that family isn't just blood. Family is the choices we make to show up for each other. Family is love that doesn't end, even when people do. Wear this ring with pride, knowing that your mother fought for you, your grandmother protected you, and I loved you before you were even born." To Evelyn, if you're reading this, you figured out what I already knew about Daryl. You protected our family. You always do. Keep loving them with the same fierceness you showed that day you took the blanket from the trash. That's the real legacy. That's what matters. No matter what happens, no matter how lost our family feels, love will lead us back to each other. It always does. Forever yours,
James. I sat down right there in Dr. Chen's shop and wept. My husband had known, somehow he'd known that Daryl was trouble. He'd left not just a ring, but a message, a promise, a blessing from beyond the grave. Dr. Chen brought me tissues and water. He didn't ask questions, he just waited until I was ready. When I finally looked up, I asked, "How much is this ring worth?" "Financially?" he said. "Approximately $15,000. But clearly that's not what matters to you." "No," I said softly, "it's not." "The note is worth everything," he continued. "Your husband was a wise man. You were blessed to have loved him." I brought the ring and the note to Patrice that evening. I didn't tell her about Dr. Chen or the discovery. I just showed her what I'd found. She read her father's words to her, to Jeremiah, to me, and then she asked to take the ring home. 2 months later, I received an invitation to a special dinner. When I arrived, I found Patrice, Jeremiah, now almost 4 years old, and my late husband's best friend, Pastor Marcus, waiting in my dining room. Patrice had prepared a beautiful meal. After we ate, she brought out the ring and the letter. "Mama," she said, "I want to tell Jeremiah about his grandfather. I want him to know the story, and I want him to understand what this ring means." She sat Jeremiah on her lap and told him about his grandfather,
The man who'd crocheted a blanket while fighting cancer. The man who'd loved their family so much that he'd left clues for them to find. The man who'd known somehow that his family would need protection and guidance even after he was gone. Jeremiah listened with the solemn attention only a small child can give to something they sense is important. "One day," Patrice said, "when you're a man, this ring will be yours. Your grandfather left it for you. He wanted you to know that you come from a family that loves fiercely, protects fiercely, and never gives up on each other." Jeremiah looked at the ring with wonder. He didn't understand the weight of what she was saying, but he understood it mattered. "I looked at my daughter and my grandson, and I saw my late husband in both of them. His wisdom, his kindness, his unwavering commitment to family." Patrice caught my eye and smiled. It was the first truly genuine smile I'd seen from her since before she met Daryl. Later that evening, after Jeremiah was asleep, Patrice and I sat on my porch under the stars. "Thank you, Mama," she said quietly. "Thank you for never giving up on us. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see. Thank you for being brave enough to act." I took her hand. That's what family does. We see each other clearly, even when it's painful. We protect each other. We love each other through the hard parts. Did you ever regret confronting him? Did you ever wish you'd just left it alone? I thought about that. I thought about all the ways it would have been easier to ignore what I'd seen, to pretend I didn't know what I knew, to let Patrice figure it out on her own in her own time. "No," I said finally. "Love doesn't give us the luxury of looking away. When we see someone we love in danger, we have to act. That's not interference. That's love." Patrice leaned her head on my shoulder and we sat together in the darkness. Two women who'd learned that sometimes the most precious things aren't hidden in jewelry or blankets. They're hidden in the bonds between us. They're hidden in the choices we make to protect each other. They're hidden in a love that doesn't end, even when people do. Some months later, on a quiet afternoon, Patrice and Jeremiah and I visited my husband's grave. We brought flowers, his favorite white roses. Jeremiah placed them at the headstone with careful precision, the way his mother had taught him. "Grandpa James," Jeremiah said solemnly, his little voice carrying so much weight. "Mama says you left me a ring." I felt tears on my cheeks. Patrice knelt beside her son and whispered something in his ear. He nodded with the seriousness only a small child can muster. As we left the cemetery that day, I realized something profound. My husband hadn't just left a ring. He'd left us a roadmap, a way to find each other again when we got lost, a reminder that love is the only currency that truly matters, that family is worth fighting for, that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than comfortable lies. Sometimes the greatest gifts aren't wrapped in boxes. They're wrapped in blankets. They're hidden in letters they're left behind by people who love us so much that they reach across death itself to protect us. My husband protected us. My daughter protected us. And in protecting them, I protected myself. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to meet you down there and hear what this story meant to you. Did it resonate? Did it make you think about the people you need to protect? Please subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story. And lastly, download your ebook titled Suspense and Thriller Stories by clicking the link in the pinned comment. Thank you for listening to my family's journey. Thank you for caring about our truth.